It's not uncommon to need to extend the timeline of a model. Whilst this can be really easy, we often see it being done wrongly. In fact, we had 2 model audits recently where the timeline was extended partway through the project in between iterations of the model. In both cases, that created lots of errors. So I've done this video to show you how to do it right and really quite quickly. I'm going to use this case study model that we use for training, and this is a typical scenario. Here we have a few months of actuals, and then if we scroll to the right, this goes out till December 2025, and just to the right of that we have a summary period for the 5 years of the model. That timeline is then referenced by each of these other sheets that need a timeline, so we've effectively got an identical thing on each sheet referring to the master timeline. And what we see a lot of people do is to go to the last period and insert some extra columns at the end, and then copy across or drag across the formulae from the last column. Now if you do that, you are going to run into problems, and I've got an example here of what that looks like if that's the approach you take. So here this is extended out to December 2027 using that approach, and that's been done on all of these sheets where we have a timeline. But if we just scroll right a bit, then it's very obvious in this situation that there's a problem. We've got all these #ref errors in the last 2 years. Now depending on the approach you use to summarizing your monthly periods or quarterly periods, whatever they may be, into annual periods, then the result here may be different. You may end up with zeros rather than #refs. In any case, there's a way to extend the timeline, eliminating those kind of problems altogether. So this is the model before we've extended the timeline again, and I'm going to start with this. Now there are a few prerequisites for this to work properly. The first one being one of the best practice items that we recommend. One of those recommendations is that all the time periods on all the sheets are in the same column. Now I've got a little utility which allows me to flick between the same cell on different sheets. So as I do that, you can see all of our December 2025 columns are in BS. So that's the first prerequisite. The next key thing really is to identify which sheets have a timeline on. Now just flicking through our sheets here, in fact these are arranged so the first few don't have a timeline, and we've got a scenario sheet there, and then from the input sheet onwards to the right here up until reports, in fact including the template sheet, all of those have a timeline. So assuming that that's the case, that you have all your time periods in the same column on all sheets, and you know which sheets include the timeline, then the first thing to do is to select all of those sheets together. So you can do that by selecting the first one and then holding down Shift and selecting the last one. That's if they're all next to each other. You can add individual sheets by holding down Control and clicking the Sheet tab. That will give you selections that may not be next to each other, that have gaps in between. In this case they all are next to each other, so I can just select them like that. Then we need to find one that has got a timeline on it, and our master timeline is on this global sheet, so I'm going to do the work on that one. So first of all, what I'm going to do is select the entire column that holds our last monthly time period. Now this would work similarly if you've got quarterly, but whatever is your most granular time period is the one that you need to do first. So from there I'm going to just hold down the Shift key and then scroll across, and I want 24 columns there because I'm going to add 2 years, and just by hitting Control and plus, that inserts columns between the penultimate column and the last one. So that's step one. Next I'm going to copy the previous column, so the penultimate one. I'll do that with Control C, and I'm just going to scroll to the right to take in that original column and press Control V and paste that into all of those new columns. So we've now extended our timeline by 2 years. The next thing we need to do is to extend the summary timeline. Now, similarly, keeping all of these tabs selected because those are the ones with timelines on. So since we're having 2 years additional time periods in the monthly timeline, I'm just going to add 2 extra columns in the annual timeline. So in fact I only need 2 columns selected there, and Control Plus inserts those columns for me, and I can now copy this column and copy it across. Now we can actually see the drag handle here, so if I were to drag that could give us some unexpected results, particularly actually in the monthly timeline. So in any case, I'm going to just copy that across here, including pasting over the original last column, which is now moved to the right. So Control V will do that for us. And you can see now that both our monthly timeline and our summary timeline, the annual timeline, now end on December 27. So we've added 2 years to that model, just like that. Now, before you do anything else, it's a good idea just to deselect all of these tabs. So just by selecting one other, and then we can select an individual tab again. Otherwise, everything we do is going to happen to all of those tabs. A couple of things I just want to point out here. In the version that was done by just copying across, you'll remember we had columns with hrefs at the end. Also, something that's quite common is to sum across an entire row, and because this was just copied across from the last column, we can see that it only references up to the previous last column. If I look at the one we've just done in the way I recommend, then we can see that this, by doing it the way we did, that sum range extends all the way to the end of the timeline, our new increased timeline, and also just scrolling across here, we can see that the last 2 time periods here also properly pick up the summary figures from the monthly timeline. So you'll hopefully find that useful and a quick way to extend a timeline. Now, you might have noticed that I was able to move around quite quickly here. So a couple of the things I did was moving between tabs to get to the same cell on the adjacent sheets. Another thing that's useful here is that I can jump from this cell in this workbook to the equivalent cell in the other workbook, and that works because the sheet name is the same, so I can toggle between those two, which is useful if you're comparing versions. Those are both utilities that are included in our NXT free workbook tool, and you can download that from our website. You might find that useful when you're doing this kind of thing. I hope you find that useful, and please get in touch if we can help with anything similar.